It is my great pleasure to welcome back to the program the founder of Workers Strike Back, Seattle City Council member, and host of the new YouTube show and podcast, On Strike. We had Kshama on a few weeks ago, but circumstances being what they are, we thought it very much appropriate to welcome back our friend Kshama Sawant. Kshama, thanks so much for being here again. Good to see you.
Really good to see you too, Keaton. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Your show On Strike just happened to launch the same day that we thought we were getting a broad, sweeping United Auto Workers strike. And Socialist Alternative just published a piece, which you just sent me during the countdown here. So I will throw that up on the screen right now. UA Workers on Strike. Escalate to Win. Now, this was written by M. Smith, so I'm assuming you did not write this piece, but this was published on the Workers Strike Back piece. You and I spoke offline a bit about the strategy, the last-minute change in strategy by the UAW under the leadership of President Shawn Fain. And we gave, on our last show, our raw take because we went on Friday morning, which was the day of the strike. The strike started midnight the night before. And so we gave our raw takes on it, our first impressions of it. I made sure to couch my take with the disclaimer that I am not an expert on this stuff, and so I could be wrong. But that's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring in a true expert on this stuff, and that would be you. So what are your thoughts on this auto worker strike? What do you make of the last minute change in strategy from all 145,000 workers striking to this slow drip, originally 13,000, the stand-up strike, as they are calling it, that will escalate over time if a deal is not reached? Go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say, Keaton, I thought you were correct in the way you expressed your opinions in the last episode when we talked about this issue.
Oh, great. Well, in that case, thank you very much for joining. We'll see you later.
That clearly, we have to draw the balance appropriately in the sense that this is overall a very exciting situation to be in, where a mass of the auto workers take this historic strike authorization vote, and there is real enthusiasm about the strike. We can see just nationally, the Gallup poll that shows that 75% of Americans support the UAW strike. I mean, this is also at a moment when there is, in terms of strategic leverage as well, it is still a relatively very low unemployment situation in the economy. So it is strategic that workers should be going on strike right now, and clearly there is huge support. And as M. Smith says in this article on Socialist Alternative website, the demands that the union has put forward are really bold and exciting. I mean, obviously, they started by talking about a 46% wage increase over 4 years. Unfortunately, Shawn Fain sort of downgraded that to, I think, about 30%, but we'll come to the strategy of the leadership in a second. But just if you look at the demands overall, 46% wage increase over 4 years, regular cost of living wage increases, ending this really rotten two-tier pay scale where new hires make a third less than the veteran wage, and really, it takes them 8 years before reaching the top of the pay scale, and also restoring these really deceptive and really denuding of the workers' pensions, this 401k, so-called 401k plans, back to defined benefit. This is a very important demand as well, and then making sure that there is adequate health insurance and more paid time off. So overall, it's not surprising that there is real enthusiasm both among the UAW rank and file and among the working class as a whole for their strike. But it is it's at best, I could say it's disconcerting, or as you said, I like your term, a real head scratcher as to why the leadership under Shawn Fain would choose to have in their opening salvo only have less than 10%, about 8% of their workforce, of the membership, go on strike. It's really not, I don't want to be a mind reader, but I will say, just from, if you know the basics of the character of the class struggle under capitalism, then you should know that when there is so much at stake for the auto industry bosses, the Biden administration, the push towards electric vehicles, which I hope we can talk about before we end this segment, which is, I think it's really the elephant in the room in many ways. When you look at all of that, it is at best naive, I would say, to mostly rely on moralistic arguments. I mean, I will say one thing is, it's really it should be understood as a genuine breath of fresh air that there are a few, very few, like less than a handful of leaders like Sean Fain who come out and say it like it is in terms of how it is between bosses against workers. In the sense, for example, he has said very clearly that a month's wage, profits, whatever income, overall income for the bosses is equivalent to a year's worth of wages of the workers. And he's also said that the bosses could easily double the wages of all the workers, not raise the prices of any of the products, and yet take home enormous profits. Now, the status of business unionism in these last 5 decades has been so abysmal. The decline in the labor movement has been so dramatic and so tragic that we've nary had a union leader who was willing to even speak in these class struggle terms. So I just wanted to draw up a correct balance and acknowledge that all of that is important. But at the end of the day, if the strategy does not match the rhetoric, then there is a real problem. So I would say that at best, this idea of only having less than 10% of the membership go on strike, at best, this could be interpreted as a very incorrect understanding of class forces and what actually will force the bosses under capitalism to concede. And again, at best, it has caused some real confusion in the ranks. And I think an escalation plan, as the article says, is immediately necessary. And I thought it was important how you, in your show, you played the live video of Sean Fain, the leader of UAW, president, talking about his the idea of a so-called stand-up strike and expecting that it was going to be greeted with a lot of excitement by the workers. But again, I would say at best it was highly confused, but there were many negative comments. I looked at the live feed from that YouTube show, from his address, and it was clear that workers were really confused, and then some workers clearly understood that this is not going to work, that this is just if we don't have an escalating strategy, then it is going to hand it to the bosses. And I think the Ford has already announced layoffs. GM has threatened to announce layoffs. Yes. So just as somebody who's fighting for workers, I think we have to be very, very serious about this and understand that as leaders, we cannot allow the rank and file to be sitting ducks to the bosses. So why would you go on strike with one hand tied behind your back? And in reality, it's almost like two hands tied behind your back with 90% of your workforce not going on strike.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to layoffs, I think you put it very well, is that you're making a lot of workers sitting ducks. It seems like the longer the strike goes on, the greater the advantage of management. Because under capitalism, management has capital. Capital buys you time, and it buys you a window of opportunity to adjust your strategy. Whereas striking all at once with everything you've got shortens their window of time to react. So let me just play you a little example of what I mean by that, and I'd love to get your take on this, because this was CNBC's Jim Cramer in the days leading up to the strike, reacting to Sean Fain. It's very interesting what he says, knowing what we know now, which he did not know back then, because this was before the strike was set to go off. So we're going to play this. This is pretty quick, but I think it's interesting.
They're preparing to strike these companies in a way they've never seen before.
Oh, Jim, you said Ford does have the best offer, I think at 20.
Well, I'm going to posit something. The man you saw just now, I think, is a paper tiger. He's coming in and saying, well, they've never seen anything like it. I think there's a nuclear option on the table if he's not careful. And that nuclear option is a country called Mexico. You don't hear about it much. But if you say we're intransigent and we're going to stay at 40%, there's no give. Well, you know what? Monterrey, Puebla,
And
Correct or wrong?
There's the capacity to have that happen, not overnight.
Mercedes did it in 2 years.
There's the capacity. So this other stooge, I don't know this guy's name, says there's the capacity to outsource to Mexico overnight. And Kramer says, no, Mercedes did it in 2 years. And so it seems like if you're planning a stand-up strike, rolling strikes that are going to escalate over time, you're dragging the process out and making it easier for management to outsource, because by dragging the process out, you give the big three automakers time to phase out production here and increase production in Mexico. So does that not undermine the workers? Like, I think the longer this goes on, the less likely the workers are to get a good deal. And the more likely management is to do exactly what these finance goons said they would do if push came to shove, which is shut down everything and move all the jobs into, Mexico or overseas, wherever. But either way, that's a bad deal for UAW. And, you hate to see strategy make sages out of these goons, but it seems like what they're saying, while certainly, hideously amoral, it seems like they may have read this right, which is troubling, to put it mildly.
Yes, I think they are. I mean, to some degree, he is that guy. Is that really whatever oily guy is really?
I don't know the other guy's name. I know Jim Cramer. He's the famous one. The sidekick, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't mean in a physical sense, but I just mean in a political sense. He's so whatever. But he, I think he is, as the other guy corrected him, he is. Obviously, in order to, it's important for the bosses and their spokespeople to have a real bravado here, because that's part of the class war as well. And so he is engaging in this exaggeration that it can move overnight to Mexico. And the other guy says, well, it took 2 years for Mercedes. So in that sense, yes, you can talk about the details of how that could happen. But I don't think it is an exaggeration in any way whatsoever for the bosses to threaten mass job losses for the workers and move to another country. And in fact, I think this is another reason why it is really impossible to build what I think we need urgently, which is a militant rank and file labor movement without an understanding of capitalism itself, and without a break, in your own analysis of breaking from capitalism itself. Because as long as there is another workforce in another part of the country or in another part of the world, which is poorer and more desperate for jobs and for basic, for basic needs, that threat is always looming. So whether it happens overnight or in 2 years or in 5 years, that's not the point. The point is that that's always there. That's always present. And in fact, it's already on the cards as far as electric vehicles are concerned. I mean, one of the demands that the UAW has made correctly, but it's a question of what will be needed to actually win something like this, which is the demand that all the jobs that are moving to electric vehicle production, especially the high capacity battery production jobs, that they should be unionized. But you're not going to win that through a moralistic argument. Yes, is that correct? Is that morally just that should happen? Yes, of course. But what is going to force the hand of the bosses to do that? In fact, the whole strategy of the electric vehicle question is very much it's a battering ram that the bosses and the two big business parties are going to use against these workers. I mean, and again, this demands that you understand the nature of capitalism itself, not only in terms of workers pitted against workers and refusing to accept the race to the bottom as they're talking about, but also understanding what is the strategy by which we can both fight to win the best kinds of jobs, the best standards of living for workers, and also fight against climate change. Just to quote from an AP article, which said it was published just yesterday, in which they're saying that two of President Joe Biden's top goals, fighting climate change and expanding the middle class by supporting unions, are colliding in the key battleground state of Michigan as UAW go on strike. Eric Gordon, a professor at the University of Michigan, says, quote, what he needs, meaning what Biden needs to be the most pro-labor president ever and the greenest president ever, is a magic wand. Now, I don't accept that, in the sense that yes, under capitalism, this is how the choice is posed, because the bosses have control of everything.
Right.
And so, again, you're just sort of succumbing to their framework, and you're not challenging that framing at all. And so, all of this demands, I mean, ultimately, what does all of this analysis show in terms of concrete strategy? The concrete strategy question here is exactly what you said earlier, Keaton, which is that the bosses have all the money and all the power and all the leverage right now in this very, very limited sort of stand-up, whatever so-called stand-up strike, to wait the strike out and then ultimately potentially defeat. I'm not saying that the strike couldn't win something, but that's the most likely scenario. And this idea that some of the reform leaders have come up with these days is, this one day longer, one day stronger. That is not the way to go. That is not what's going to hurt the bosses in the way that it's absolutely necessary to hurt them in order to force them to concede to the demand. So in other words, the best strikes are the ones that are strong and short, not long and weak. And I would say, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes, as I was saying earlier, but no doubt both some of the big business unionists in the AFL-CIO and in the Democratic Party leadership have been pushing back against any idea of a strong strike. In other words, it's possible that this is what Fain and his fellow leaders, they think that this is the compromise situation that they've come up with, where they go on strike, but not quite, not angering the Biden administration too much, that sort of thing. And already in the last few hours, we have heard that the White House administration is getting directly involved. Biden has sent his 2 key labor representatives to Michigan. And so what's needed first and foremost right now is we need the rank and file in UAW to themselves get organized and not accept this so-called stand-up strike. We need them to get organized to pressure for an all-out strike and to build the widest support within the union rank and file at every facility. I think that they can get that support. There is that support. We saw that, from the response of the workers to the announcement from Sean Fain. And of course, there will be huge community support as well. And if necessary, they probably will have to prepare the ground for wildcat strikes.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, they voted 97-3 for an across-the-board strike. I mean, that's what kind of makes this kind of sleazy. It puts a bad taste in my mouth. And, I hate to say it because, Sean Fain has been very good so far. And obviously, I'm rooting for him and I'm rooting for the workers to get the best deal they could possibly get. But to have your members vote almost unanimously on one strike and then change it unilaterally without their ratification 48 hours in advance. I mean, I don't want to use a term as strong as betrayal, but that's the word that comes to mind, to be honest, because they didn't vote to do it this way. And I think this is compromising them.
It's certainly compromising them. There's no question about that. And in fact, another telling thing I'll tell you, I just watched this before coming on the show, is, as I said, in the last few hours, it has just been announced by NBC and other news outlets that the White House is now directly involved in the negotiations and is, quote unquote, working the phones. This is what they had their ticker tape announcement say. And Sean Fain was asked, I believe on CNBC, that, what do you think about Biden getting involved? Do you welcome their announcement? And I have to say, his response was basically a non-response. Like he completely skirted that question and just talked about how this is about the workers. And that to me is very worrisome, because it shows that these are all the pressures that are gaining ground on him. So, it really, again, highlights the need for the rank and file to act. It also, I have to say, this also shows, one of the paramount things to me that this whole story reveals is that it is not possible to reverse course in labor after decades of business unionism, after decades of just absolute sellout, just of burning working class people in the rank and file by a completely corrupt and compromised leadership, by simply having changes at the top. I mean, the fact that you are having these battles, election battles, like Sean Fain emerged after a real election battle inside the union, all of this is positive indication, but you cannot have the change that we need to have by simply having those kinds of changes, because even with reform leaders, we see these, as I said, let's put the most positive spin on it. And it's still the best thing you can say is that this is just a complete misunderstanding of what it takes to fight back. And also, we have to situate what's happening with UAW in the like stepping back in the context of what has happened in the last many months. Since the autumn of last year, the railroad workers were completely sold out. Their strike was broken, and that AOC and the squad members, except for Rashida Tlaib, they really participated in this. They aided and abetted this by Biden and the corporate Democrats. And then you had UPS, where the workers were ready to go on strike, but the Sean O'Brien leadership didn't actually do that. And let's not forget actually that these two are also related, because in the Railroad Workers Union, more than 50%, I believe 55%, if I'm not wrong, is Teamster rank and file. So in both cases, actually, there was a reform leadership under Sean O'Brien, Fred Zuckerman, that was involved in this. And neither cases where really they had strategic choke point leverage in the US and global economy, they were unable to or refused to carry out the kind of courageous and militant action that they should have, that workers would have supported. That didn't happen. And now now following all of that, we have what's happening with UAW. So really, I think that the most urgent thing is for the rank and file to have their own discussions, their own meetings, and start organizing in a systematic way to have a really well-planned, short and sharp strike, but industry-wide, auto industry-wide.
Yeah. Can you flesh out your point? Because you said you wanted to get into this more about the EVs and how they are at the crux of this, because I know a lot of the automakers want to start making EVs for cheaper so that they can sell them for cheaper. There are all kinds of incentives to do that. But EVs are also less labor intensive, apparently, from what we're hearing, than the way we make cars now. And then you add to that the fact that the battery manufacturers are largely non-unionized. So I don't know how much you want to get into any of those 3 points, but I know you wanted to touch more. You wanted to sort of dig more into the EV issue that you think is very central to this. So go ahead.
Yeah, I think in some ways, in some ways, the example I'm going to give is very unrelated, because the example I have is of public school teachers, educators, versus these are auto manufacturers. Their leverage position in the economy is completely different. Shutting down the profit machine of the bosses obviously is much more powerful, much more strategic. But in many ways, the question of the UAW strike, the auto industry, and the move towards electric vehicles, it's very reminiscent to me of what happened with the public school sector, where much of the funding, which was never fully enough, obviously, but because that's an impossibility under capitalism unless there's a really phenomenal fight back, and even those reforms can be rolled back. But that's what happened with the public school sector, where even the existing funding has been cut back so dramatically in district after district, and the hidden agenda, part of the hidden agenda behind that, was to really try and crush public school teachers unions, because they have been part of the bulwark of the public sector unions, and that has been part of the overall strategy of really destroying unions in the last 40-50 years. And so you can see how the emergence of charter schools has been not it didn't come out of nowhere. It came with the agenda of actually destroying unions. So in some ways, the move towards electric vehicles has been, there's that part. You cannot dissociate that part from the overall agenda as well. I mean, I know a lot of people will listen to this and say, well, this is electric vehicles. This is important that we go towards electric, versus fossil fuel powered. And that's true. But I think we also have to put that in perspective, in the sense that if the administration, if the power brokers in Washington were actually doing the best possible job to address the climate crisis, then they would be putting all this massive funding, all the subsidies that they have given to the auto industry to develop public transit system, high-speed transit systems that can move masses of people in a very energy efficient and in a clean energy kind of way. So I think that needs to be pointed out. But even setting that aside, as you were saying exactly, that if you look at the numbers, like Tesla, for example, which is the leader in EV, which is not unionized, it currently makes vehicles at an estimated labor cost of $45 to $50 per hour, whereas these three, Ford, Stellantis, and GM, they make these vehicles for about $64 to $67 per hour. This is counting all of it, wages, benefits, and all of that. And so, and aside from paying lower wages and benefits in their non-unionized workforce, Tesla has also padded its profit margins by bringing down production costs at its factories in under other ways. For example, they'll use, I'm not an expert, but I'm just telling you what experts have shared with us. It uses what are called large castings in place of small metal parts, and it has brought, and this is also a strategic business decision, they have brought many parts of the supply chain, including battery manufacturing, in-house, so that they are not subject to other companies getting unionized or having unionized workforces in the first place. So all of this is in the mix. Clearly, despite the eye-popping profits that the big three have made, they're and this shows the nature of capitalism. Their calculation is not, look at how much profits we are making, we should share some of this with the workers. Their calculation is, look at how much more Tesla is making and how much less they are able to spend on workers, on labor per unit product. We need to go there. That's the logic of capitalism, and that's the inexorable logic of capitalism. So whether it is to fight climate change or for workers' rights, we need that clarity. And obviously, we need to be fighting for all the EV jobs to be union jobs, regardless of what they are. And we should be pushing back against the use of EVs to deal a massive blow to UAW and the labor movement. Can I just say concretely, in terms of organizing in the rank and file, if somebody's wondering, what do I actually mean by that? What they should be doing is, first of all, concretely, the rank and file should be having meetings. They should be having their own meetings. And all the workers who don't agree with the stand-up strike, and they understand the strategic importance of urgently expanding the strike to industry-wide, they should develop leaflets, flyers, and they should start giving them out on the picket lines, prepare their talking points, talk to their fellow workers, explain why they disagree with this decision and why it should be a short, sharp, all-encompassing strike. They should develop petitions that their fellow workers can sign for an all-out strike. So these are the concrete things they should be doing.
Please clap.